Welcome, everyone. I'm going to give everyone a couple of minutes to get rolling in. My name is Carla Sanchez with the HTA, and we're going to get started shortly. I hope everyone's day is going wonderfully. I have the EDRAY team on the line, and they'll be presenting their panelists in a few moments. Thank you for joining How to Be a Best-in-Class Trucker, a Candid Conversation.
Hey, y'all.
Thank you, Carla.
We'll give it a few minutes and we'll introduce everybody.
Yeah. I see people rolling in. All right. Before I hand over the reins to the EDRAY team, I do want to let everybody know that we're going to have a Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. You can select on the control panel in the drop-down menu the question panel, and then you'll be able to input it in there. And if anybody wants to raise their hand and speak to ask a question, you can do so as well. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Paul Kennedy with EDRAY to get us started.
Hey, y'all. I'm Paul Kennedy, and as Carla said, and I'm the Vice President of Destination Management at EDRAY Collaborative Port Logistics. We're based out of North Carolina, but we have an office in Long Beach right there on Ocean Boulevard. I believe it's 180 Ocean Boulevard, right over near the ports. And we're here to host a call today. So for many years, the intermodal industry has been overlooked, and it's not been the big spend that domestic shipping was, and less eyes were on the containers. But in the recent years, we've noticed that things have begun to change. Even prior to the pandemic, the BCO world was becoming interested in gaining better visibility in their units in order to provide more accurate forecasting of product availability throughout their networks. At EDRAY, we believe that really excellent container visibility is possible through collaboration of all stakeholders. From origin providers to the intermodal truckers, we think this is possible. For all the shippers network, it's important that the shipper wants to work with you as well as all the different providers, which leads us to today's conversation is how to be a best-in-class trucker for BCOs. We believe that being the trucker of choice revolves around a few key aspects, namely communication, timeliness, data quality, billing, forecasting, and service. So we wanted to talk with 4 different parties involved in the intermodal trucking process to get their perspective on how you can be a trucker of choice. First off, let me introduce Rob Sonnenberg, man with the beard up here. He's with Fortune Brands Water Innovations, or a little less formally known as MOEN Faucets, as I like to call them. Down here, we have Eric Nowak. He's the Vice President of Transportation at ADP and Triangle Group. We also have Dan Burkart, who's sitting next to me. He's the Director of Marketplace at EDRAY. And then lastly, we got Paxton Bowman, who's the Director of Destination Management at EDRAY. He actually sits out in Long Beach, where many of y'all are. What we've done today is create a bit of a conversation around these topics that we think involve, that we think make up a trucker of choice. So we're just going to ask some questions and have these guys answer them, since they all play very large parts in the trucking process. First thing is communication and connectivity. I know as truckers, you all feel the time strain between customer interactions and handling your day-to-day operations. And at EDRAY, we believe that meetings and emails can be limited through EDI and API exchange, because when it comes down to it, we know that the trucker needs all their time that they can possibly get, and the BCO just wants their answers in a quick manner. So first question goes out to Rob, and from a broad perspective, Rob, from BCO's perspective, why is communication important to MOEN? And is there any part of that communication that's more important to you?
Yeah, so hey, thanks everyone for letting me join this panel today. It is a good opportunity for me to get out and talk to as many people as we can and hear back from what you folks are seeing in the field too. To your question, Paul, yeah, I mean, communication is critical, whether it's internal or external with our carriers. It's usually the #1 reason why things get slowed down. You know, as we're looking at all the interconnectivity that we have with the APIs and the EDIs, all the data interchanges, communication for us, I mean, we've seen it a lot through the pandemic. We try to build that relationship with our carriers so that, you know, when things are bogging down at the ports or they're, you know, whatever they're seeing on the ground, whatever they communicate to us can help us better align our priorities, right? So it happened both ways, and it's, I mean, it's critical to our day to day.
Yeah, I understand. Thanks. So Eric, talking about the API, the EDI that Rob mentioned, you know, how are you as a trucker communicating with your BCOs without interfering with your daily operation and you know, taking too much of your analysts, your dispatchers' time? You know, is there anything else you can automate besides just pickup and delivery times?
So our system allows us to automate quite a few things. Unfortunately, when it comes to what the communication most BCOs wants, comes down to any extra costs that they're going to incur. So with all the craziness at the port, you know, they're gonna, when you get an invoice for, you know, 9 hours of delay time, it usually tends to rub your customer the wrong way, especially if he or she didn't know that was coming. So we've been working to automate some of our communication. Unfortunately, when it comes to accessorials, that is one of the areas where we aren't able to provide that information, and it simply comes across as an email. We do some reporting that comes across email wise on accessorial billing the day before or the day after, but a lot of times people want to know about it in real time. As far as EDI goes, we prefer that information obviously interchange back and forth so that we limit the amount of communication. But when it comes to automation for us, as far as a lot of the communication the customers want, I can send it automatically, but right now there isn't a solution as far as EDI goes.
Gotcha. So I understand the automatic accessorials going out. You know, you load an accessorial into your TMS, a stop off, a chassis charge, whatever it goes automatically out to the BCO or whoever the party is that you bill. What does an automatic detention notification look like? I know when I was in the trucking world back in Chicago that it was, you know, but first off, it was 2 free hours back then. And the deal was we always needed to notify the customer in an hour and a half, you know, worth of time so they could tell the warehouse to hurry up. And then we tell them the detention starts after 2 hours and then tell them what's over with. Do y'all have an automated process for that, or is it still the driver calling in, you know, telling you what's going on?
We do have an automated process for that. It sends out an email. It's basically like a canned email that says detention starts in whatever 15 minutes. It is a little bit difficult, especially for a big BCO that's moving, you know, say you're moving 50 to 100 loads a day. A lot of times you're not going to get a response back, but it is a notification, and basically we can set it so it moves. So if it's an hour out, you're an hour away from detention, and then it counts down to 15 minutes to let the customer know that they are in fact going to have a charge at some point. Smaller customers will a lot of times reach out and they may say pull the driver, do whatever, but in most cases, you know, it's more of a notification. You really don't have a choice when it comes to wait time at the Port of LA. Because if you leave, you may not get another appointment for a few days, and it costs a lot more for the demurrage. But yeah, it's just a simple email like you remember. The only difference is the system sends it once it notices the driver's been there for over, you know, an hour or 2 hours, whatever the agreement is.
Are y'all, and I'm sorry, I'm going off script. Are y'all geofencing your drivers to get their arrival times, or are they sending their message?
Both. So we do have everything geofenced. So if they're using their app properly, and that goes into accurate data later on we talk about, but basically what happens is when they trip the geofence, it starts the wait time. Of course, and then the debate starts. Should the geofence start at the pedestal? Does the geofence start, you know, whatever, at the wait line? So basically ours has a queue that mimics what the HTA has with GeoStamp, and we use that as our queue. And so when the driver comes in, if he's using the app properly, Tritium automatically starts the clock. If the driver isn't using the app properly, you're probably going to get some free wait time, because he's going to check in when he gets to his spot. But either way, as soon as he checks in, the clock starts.
Understood. Thanks. So Paxton, that was just, the truck perspective on how the process works. How does EDRAY, how do you measure your truckers' timeliness of communication?
So, before a container ever arrives, we're importing data, validating it, making sure that it's correct before it goes out. And, we have established process for receiving this information, but also disseminating this information. Look, all stakeholders, in the process and the supply chain, essentially tee up the next stakeholder, right? And so if we don't have information to be able to share in a timely manner, that delays the trucker, which delays the DC, which delays the return of the container going back to the terminal. And that's where you get breakdowns and demurrage and detentions and per diems accumulating. So it's extremely important to get information back, not just from other stakeholders besides the truckers, but most importantly the truckers. So when appointments, this is just the standard data, the day-to-day stuff. Making appointments and when they pick up a container, making sure that information is passed along, within hours and not days, so that the next milestone is basically set up. On top of that, exceptions as well. And, I would say it's equally important if there's exceptions. So, let's say for some reason there's no appointments at a terminal, or if there's an issue with a chassis, or there's holds on containers or whatnot. Communicating that information timely also helps to prevent the next stakeholder from wasting time or wasting money, really, planning or forecasting for those shipments to arrive. Another point to that too that I want to highlight is when we're communicating, it's at least for us on our side, pretty important to have a single POC. We see sometimes multiple people communicating the same thing, and even though they're trying to do the right thing, sometimes it becomes more confusing, right? So having designated points of contact, especially on the trucking side, is important. And that communication provides us with better performance at the end of the day, and so that's why it's important.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you. As far as communication and connectivity goes, it's essentially useless unless it happens quickly, and then the data quality is as close to perfection as it possibly can be. So with the implementation of more and more technology in the intermodal space, we're seeing a necessity, or at least a building necessity, for more real-time information. The BCOs are looking for clean, actionable data to make their decisions about their network. So with that, Eric, what do the truckers do to make their data more reliable, to either scrub it or not, with the understanding that many of these departure delivery messages happen from the owner operator, and I remember sometimes they'd all like to log into their app at the same time and then send 5 messages at once. How do you ensure that the BCO is getting proper information when the driver may or may not send it accurately? I know you said you geo-fenced, which is a great way to do it, but if they're still on their Tritium messages, what y'all's play there? You're on mute, Eric.
I know, sorry. We actually moved to 100% on the MC3 app, which was a lot more accurate than the MC2 a couple years ago. And more than anything, it's an education for the drivers that they need to, as part of the agreement, they need to utilize that app in the proper way. And the main way that we're able to ensure that they're doing that is for our company drivers, it's tied back to their performance and bonuses, and it works the same for anybody who's working through us as a independent contractor. So they very similar to providing their paperwork, the detail. For some reason, we in this industry still like to pass back and forth, interchanges from the terminal instead of data. So we require the drivers to scan that into the system as well. And there's another. Yeah.
Is that a picture?
Yeah, they just take a picture and it uploads into my system. And then as part of the billing, if I could do EDI billing, that all goes as part of the packet. So you get the information from the terminal, you get the tickets from the terminal as part of the bill. Like I said, the terminal tickets, I'm still not sure why we still collect those, but it's something in the industry where I think there's a big opportunity.
Yeah, I was curious as to how often you're seeing. I mean, I know for a lot of our customers, they only require outgate times and basically zip codes to bill. Where is this going from? Where is it going to? Which container you moved? What's our reference number, et cetera. Are you seeing that a lot of the BCOs or a lot of your customers are still requiring the buck slips and the J1s and all that good stuff?
Yeah, you still see quite a bit. It usually comes through under forwarders, not BCOs, but there are BCOs that do require it. Like I said, I'm not sure why, because most of them are tied into the terminal somewhere or the other, so they know exactly when the container outgated and when it ingated back in. But for some reason, people like to see those things.
Yeah, interesting. Hopefully those go away.
Yeah, I really hate them. But
as far as downstream effects, Rob, how does data quality play an importance in the day-to-day for the BCO, for a MOEN? What do y'all, are y'all just making decisions for the future, or are you using that on a very real-time basis? What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I'd really say both, right? So with the emergence of all the IT that's hit the market here in these past few years, we're taking advantage of all of it, right? So whether it's finished goods coming in from overseas, we're trying to hit a promo, trying to hit a date, or components coming in where we're trying to, set up scheduling on production. Having that technology, with the carriers and with, the platforms like EDRAY, just gives us the ability to better time containers where we didn't have the capability before, right? And then, on top of that too, it gives us an audit trail that is just, it's much more defined, much more actionable than we've had in the past.
Hear you. So, Paxton, when it comes to trucker data and just origin data, any data in general, how much time would you say the team spends scrubbing data that should be clean the first time around?
Well, I mean, luckily, most of our data comes in clean, right, through EDI. We do have some manual uploaded process from flat files, but, most of what we're receiving is received through an EDI 856. I would say, 20% of our time is really spent validating and scrubbing information, which is important because without that data being validated, and that's really one of the key hallmarks of EDRAY is that we're providing clean, actionable information. And if it's not scrubbed up front, decisions being made on the back end of that, are not as trustworthy in the information that we send out. So that is one of the things we focus on heavily here. The teams do a lot of cross-referencing, so as we receive information, whether it's, ETAs or port of discharge or final destination, we're cross-referencing that information against TOSs from the terminals or the steamship line sites, or other sites ran by, truckers. So for us, that's an important step in the process, but it's also an important product that we feel that we provide not just to, our shippers, but also to the trucking communities that we partner with. We want to make sure that they have information that's right the first time so that they don't have to question. There's nothing worse than getting some, bad data, making a decision, sending a container to the wrong place or picking it up from the wrong place, and then having to deal with the, exception management after the fact. That 20% that we spend on the front end saves us 80% of really the time on the back end.
Yeah, I hear that. So from the truckers' perspective, Eric and Dan, how often are y'all dispatched bad information, whether it be from a, customs broker or a destination cargo manager or a freight forward, or whatever the case may be. I feel like that's always been a problem is inaccurate data flowing down to y'all's world.
Eric, why don't you go first?
We do get some inaccurate data. It's probably less with it. Most of the time it has to do with how customers process their data.
Mhm.
So they may have multiple bill of ladings on one container and finding out what's the right bill of lading when you're going to pick it up. Or it's the wrong terminal because there was a switch there. We do get some bad data, but I would say not as much probably as the data that comes out of the trucking community when you talk about some of the data that as far as what time something outgated, what time something arrived. So I think the data exchange between most of the BCOs, or like when I get information from EDRAY, I think a lot of that has to do with most of the time it's good. It's just how we process that data and refine it to make sure that it comes in the right way.
Yeah, typically it's like the final CY or final destination is incorrect, but for the most part, it's pretty good. I mean, yeah, information has to be somewhat accurate through customs and that's.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, ours is for the most part pretty clean, where we have a situation and great team knows, I mean, we do a lot of split containers and facilities that are kind of close together. So we'll end up moving containers between sites every now and then. I think, back to the communication with our carriers, we've improved it to the point where it's no longer an issue. It's just more of a, how do we change it on the move kind of thing.
Yeah, I know for us at EDRAY going through the pandemic, say in mid 2022 or mid 2021 going into 2022, we had a huge issue with the overseas providers not giving us a proper port, not being able to get the proper port until right before it was able to dock. Was that jacking y'all up quite a bit? Not having proper information. How do you? I'm sorry, I was talking to you.
Yeah. Say that again.
I was just saying, I know when from the DM side, in 2021 and 2022, we had tons of problems not being able to get not getting an accurate report of discharge where the container was going. I was just curious if that was affecting you. You were seeing dry runs from truckers and stuff.
Yeah, it was a nightmare because you had people changing terminals or putting containers on banana boats and doing all sorts of weird stuff. And yeah, it was a complete mess.
All right.
Yeah, I want to add something to that. I mean, one of the benefits that we have, working at EDRAY is we see large amounts of data come through from all sorts of different stakeholders. So all the steamship lines, a whole host of truckers, DCs. The benefit to that is that when we see trends or issues, let's say there's an EDI stream that's coming through, we don't just fix it on a myopic level. We're not just fixing it for this data set. A lot of times we're able to use that information and then look across the network and fix it on a broader scale. And again, that's one of the benefits. And with the more, customers we bring on, more truckers that we bring on, that expands, right? And it gives us even more data sets to look at and help to fix information in bulk when we do updates.
Thanks, Paxton. So we briefly talked about billing before when Eric was talking about the buck slips, but really I want to talk about, timely billing and things like that. So Dan, what do you look for when it comes to billing from a trucker, and how do accessorials play a factor when you're billing, and do they cause any issues in terms of your relationship or billing with the BCO?
Sure.
Are you seeing any fallout from that?
Sure. Yeah, we need to share cameras. I'm sorry for all the listeners. My webcam won't cooperate today. So firstly, I would say it's always best to include as many accessorials as you can in the overall line haul rate. That's probably easier said than done when you're competing for business, or if Rob wants to break out storage or pre-pull and all that good stuff. So, but when you can, just to avoid confusion and never even have to have the conversation, just build it into the line haul so it's a cost of doing business. But so the original question, I think the more work you can do on the front end, the better. So always discuss the lane in its entirety, the customer's expectations. I've found that it's extremely important to take a consultative approach with the customer, especially with their network, so their DCs and their forwarders, their other truckers, because one, these are the people you're going to be working with every day, and two, it's just good business. So it's going to build rapport with everyone involved in the operations. So even if you've run guys to Redlands like 80,000 times, still get on the onboarding call, host weekly stand-ups, just so you can build that rapport, because you never know what's going to come up on those stand-up calls. Also, I think you need to know what questions to ask the customer prior to go live. For example, are empty bobtails approved to avoid per diem, or do these need to be approved sort of ad hoc or situationally? Another example, maybe a driver needs to pre-pull because he ran out of hours. So is that a cost that can be passed on to the customer, or is that a cost of doing business that I need to account for? So if I'm going to do business with Rob at MOEN, I'm going to have an upfront, candid conversation, walk through every possible scenario, so we're all on the same page and we're not surprising each other with unforeseen accessorials. So with all that said, I think it really just boils down to defining the approval process with the customer, understand what's needed for billing before it becomes a problem, understand the customer's operations, talk through the scenarios, and then have those conversations up front.
So, Eric, when are truckers still billing on empty return, or are you billing on Algate these days? The containers are hanging out for so long.
It really depends on the customer, but for the most part, we tend to bill on empty return. That way, all the charges are captured and there's no surprises later on. There's a few customers that prefer being billed when it outgates and then an accessorial bill following up. But for the most part, we bill on return.
Gotcha. Do you have any customers that are billing one-way rates these days, just leg rates?
Not really. There's a few out there right now that are trying to do that. Obviously, we've seen a rush to the bottom as volume slowed here on the West Coast. So we're all doing everything we can to make sure we don't make money right now. So you're seeing some creative pricing right now. And I've seen a couple of those rates out on the market currently, one ways. There's a big retailer that is pushing that on a website right now. And you have to figure out how to match up your loads back. So it is out there right now a lot more than it was before, but typically we try to do everything on a round trip rate based on volume customers.
Understood. How soon after in-gate are y'all usually processing those invoices or getting them out to the customer?
We try to have everything for the prior week billed by the next Friday. Mm-hmm. So basically anything that in-gates the terminal by tomorrow would need to be billed next week.
Yeah, so obviously, basically 7 days you're going to try to get it done.
Correct, and some customers want it even quicker. Some people prefer to be billed on a daily basis, which would be kind of hard without the right technology, EDI, and everything we talked about before.
Yeah, I mean, you could bill line haul and fuel pretty easily on a daily basis, but when it gets into accessorials, I mean, oftentimes there's a delay between getting all the accessorials done and the second the container hits the port, So,
correct.
Rob, from the BCO's point of view, everyone knows that you hold bids for the truckers to win the business, and the BCOs to budget themselves to the best ability with the information that the truckers provide. Where do you see the differences from what the truckers say in the bid versus the actual bills that you receive? Because I'm quite certain you do. So.
No, I mean, if we have the right conversations, to Dan's point up front, we generally don't run into the situation. I won't say it doesn't happen. It's always interesting when we go through a bid and we start seeing the invoices come in, and then the congestion fees start racking up. Detention to merge, it's more of a sticker shock than anything, right? Especially stuff that we've had go on this past couple of years. Yeah, I mean, it's a communication for us. I think my biggest area are freight pay folks. When we start up new business, if we don't have the connections, we don't have the the EDI set up right away. We try to look for how do we bridge that gap until we get there. And for us, what we're looking for is clean invoicing. I'm looking for everything to be broken out. I want the line haul, I want the fuel, I want the accessorials. Some issues we've had in the past, we'll get separate invoices, right? We'll get the line haul and fuel, and then a week later we'll get the accessorials. It just creates a lot of work on the carrier, BCO, on everyone's side. So we try to make it as clean as we can, or work with our carriers to make sure it's clean.
I think to your point, to Dan's point, having that conversation on the front end is probably the best play you can have. Just, hey, here's all the weird stuff that can happen in this area. We've seen this at this port. We've seen this in this city. Extra chassis splits. Whatever the deal is. But
I've had those talks.
Yeah. So, all right. Moving on. Point we mentioned earlier was forecasting. There's a lot of back and forth when it comes to forecasting in the intermodal industry, from the BCO to the trucker, and the trucker forecasting power back based on what the peaks and valleys that the BCO says the trucker's going to have. Then when it comes down for the actual shipments to ship, you got to have a reliable ETA to port so the trucker can really plan out what they're doing. So, excuse me, I lost my place. Rob, sorry, Paxton. What's a realistic time frame between the time that the containers get on the water until you can actually give the trucker their delivery order?
So, our vessel files are usually arriving 3 to 4 days after they leave the point of origin. But for most of our truck communications, and that's usually set up initially when we're talking to our shipping partners or shippers, it's about 7 to 10 days out. So within 7 to 10 days, we're using a predetermined allocation template that's set up by the customer, by our shipper, to disseminate all the orders to the dray carriers. So that's always done, obviously, after we scrub the information, but no later than 7 days. And that's important because it gives our dray carrier partners time to look at and assign resources, see if they have the capacity, right, to move these moves, and make any changes before the ship arrives. I mean, obviously they're going to have a few days. It's very rare that the container comes off the first day it's in port and it's available, but that really gives the dray carriers a week or two to set up all of their equipment to make sure that they can pick these up on time.
Yeah. Thanks, Eric. As a trucker, how far out can you realistically forecast your availability?
We forecast out about a week out. We have visibility too, but when we forecast for the next week, that's typically done on like Wednesday, Thursday. We start planning for the next week. Obviously that's been a little bit more difficult with the supply chain issues and ETAs not being updated properly by some of our steamship line partners. So it has been a little bit harder, but typically we have a pretty good idea by about Wednesday of what the next week's going to look like availability wise. And and we start working on a plan and the power we're going to need for the next week.
Gotcha. So Rob, from the BCO side, I know this last year has been kind of a crazy struggle. How do you feel moving into the future and holding these long-term relationships with truckers? I know MOEN usually contracts them for a whole entire year. Do you think that'll still happen, or do you think we'll see more of the spot rate market that we're seeing in the domestic world happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends, right? COVID, when it was going crazy, we were just looking for space. We were looking for ports, trying to maintain a level of service. Now that we're coming out of that, we're seeing kind of that slowdown. We're looking for the value in what we're doing too. So we have examples of carriers that we use today that I have no intention on changing, right? Whether it's a year or next year, if they keep providing the level of service that they're doing for us, no need for me to change, right? On the other hand, we have carriers that, I'm looking forward to that next bid. It's just a matter, we try to have that relationship where it works for both, because obviously the change is much harder than, maintaining a relationship that works.
Yeah.
So it just depends. It really does.
Well, speaking of service, at least from my point of view, over the last 3 years, I think the industry has changed its view of service, or at least its view of what good service is. I feel like the BCOs in the past would expect to say trucker jump and them say how high, or you go pick up this container and you say, okay, I'll go grab it right now. But it's really transformed from an immediate service to like the trucker being able to provide a realistic service, like something that they can actually get done, or a timeline of when the action is going to happen, rather than just going out and picking up the containers. And I think it's good. It's collaboration is what needed to happen. Obviously, there's a lot of different industry factors that are keeping us from having more drivers and chassis and things to help move containers to the ports. But I think the understanding is going to be better in the long run, that the BCOs are more willing to work with the truckers and understand that they have some limitations that they just cannot control. So,
no, yeah, and I would concur with that. Absolutely. I mean, there's no way you can't. I mean, everything that's gone on these past few years, you can't not, have that set up with your carrier and understand what they're going through, and they, understand our need as well. So, without a doubt.
So, Dan, what's good service look like to you as a broker from a trucker?
Sure. Can you get in the spotlight? Yeah. So I'm going to ask Rob for container forecasting, and then I'm going to turn around and ask Eric for power forecasting. So I typically dispatch 10 to 15 days prior to vessel arrival. So if Eric gives me power forecasting, I'm going to have ample time to react if he's down, his heavy hitters or whatever. That's always greatly appreciated. To address most of this question, I just have a list of things that really stand out to me. So I'm just going to run through my bullet points. We're talking about service. So communicate potential issues before they become a problem. For example, today's last free day, your only night driver, his wife went into labor, whatever. Tell me ASAP so I can repower the container and get it out to avoid Rob's demurrage. Subscribe to weekly or daily stand-ups with my ops team. Daily automated reporting, twice a day, maybe 3 times a day, depending on the complexity of the lane. I always ask for a single point of contact for urgent matters. So group emails are great, but somebody we can pick up the phone and call right away is always important to have. Monthly, quarterly meet and greets. So I visit Eric, Eric comes and visits me. We do that around the country. If you don't have rapport in a relationship, you basically have nothing. Team synergies and rapport. So just to reiterate that point, in my experience, being overly transparent with my truckers and fostering positive relationships with my truckers will trump the best technology on the planet ever, forever and ever. So I can't stress that enough. Eric knows that what my measly 6% margin might be. He knows everything because essentially he's just an extension of my team. So there's no reason to hide information from the trucker. Transparency is key. Lastly, I would say quarterly rate audits to ensure we're staying competitive. We don't want to risk losing the business. So once a month, once a quarter, whatever, audit the rates so I can go to Rob and say, congrats, Rob, we're reducing your rate by $100, versus Rob coming to me, which means he has some other trucker asking for the business.
So you're saying keep up with the market, and
yep.
You know that every trucker out there is about to lower their rates, and Rob can get another rate real easily. You might want to go ahead and do it.
100%.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah. And Eric goes, absolutely not. So, Eric, what are y'all doing to set yourselves apart from other truckers and help create a better product for the BCO?
Well, I mean, there's a few things that we do that we try to excel at. We do, well, we made it through a lot of the craziness we had down at the terminals by doing street turns. So we freed up a lot of our chassis by moving into the export market, which we hadn't done a lot before. And that allowed us some flexibility to return those loads and utilize those chassis for our customers. We have done some flow stacks. We work with our customers to set that up. Unfortunately, over the past couple of years, with everything going on, there hasn't been room at the terminal to really do it. So that's been put on hold for at least a year. And then the other thing we try to do is we try to figure out really what's important to the customer, the BCO, in order to provide that service to them. And a lot of times it is more relationship based, making sure they have somebody they can reach out to, making sure the communication's there. It's great that we have all the automation, and I know it's nice to not be reporting data back and forth every morning, but having somebody that they can reach out to, like Dan said, and actually talk to is usually really important when people need something right away.
Yeah. So Rob, Eric might have answered my last question for you. What can a trucker do that will at a lower rate than beating them out of a lane?
I think it goes back to what I was just saying, right? It depends on what's going on at the moment. Again, going back to the COVID example, and I hate going back to that, but we were hitting service hard, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where I'm going back to my reliable carriers, and I'm going to pay the fee to get the service. Coming out of that, where we're seeing the market adjust, we're seeing the congestion kind of go down a bit. Try to get costs back in line with service, so we have a good balance there. So I'm not always going to go for the lowest cost. We're looking for that service piece. So on a new carrier, we're looking for the feedback from partners like EDRAY or anybody else in the market that we currently work with to say, yeah, this is a reliable carrier or customer. And then it's certainly on the incumbents. We know what we're getting with them. So I don't think it's always going to be lowest cost because the stuff we're moving is just, the timing is just too critical to, just throw it out to the wind.
Yeah. I hear you. Well, everybody, that's about it as far as the discussion goes. We're happy to open it up for questions. Again, we got Rob Sonnenberg with Fortune Brands Water Innovations. We got Eric Nowak with ADP, and we've got Dan Burkart with EDRAY. He runs the marketplace of EDRAY, and then we've got Paxton Bowman, who's the director of the West Coast for EDRAY for destination management. We're happy to open the floor up for some questions if anybody has any. Carla, if you want to teach us how to do that.
Yes, of course. If anybody wants to raise their hand and speak, I can unmute them. Or if you would like to submit a question in the chat, go ahead and do so now.
Okay, no questions here.
All right, no questions coming in.
All right. Well, we can call it a day then. I thank you all for the time. So
thank you so much for joining in, and thank you so much for everyone. Your presentation. Have a great day.
Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Bye.